our argument is that it not account. Okay, see, the Miracle, can you start? Can you hear us, Miracle?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, I think they're also good. Okay, so Echo Cinema cannot account for the experiences of Africans, and therefore, looking at what Kadetani Iheke has done, the argument here is that African cinema must capture the representations of the environment in films, the ecological issues affecting the continents, and that African cinema and then African critics must look at how the environment is related to colonialism or post-colonialism, the new colonial enterprises in Africa. And therefore, we are suggesting that eco-criticism cannot account for these experiences, particularly eco-criticism of the global north, because our experience is different from their experience. And building on what Kadetani has, we are suggesting that there should be a theory that accounts for the African environment and because, for instance, the African experience or the exploitation of Africa began with colonialism. It began with colonialism, and some of these the eco-criticism does not capture these experience. For instance, places like Britain didn't have this colonization, and therefore it can't be something that fits all. I think it can't be something that fits all. We must recognize the movement of environment. And therefore, we are suggesting that we should begin to look at reimagining African environment by talking about post-colonial eco-cinema that is a bit different from the conventional eco-cinema. And then post-colonial eco-cinema is no, so what is happening is that Miracle is my project, used to be my project student, and then I'm trying to see how I can, give her this kind of exposures so that, so I'm really sad that she's a very brilliant.
I think she can hear you.
Okay, can you hear me, Miracle? Okay, so and she also okay, it's fine. So let me just. Okay, so she's supposed to be here, but she felt sick. She came here. She felt sick. She had to go back. So I'm so sad that this would have been her first conference and all that. So she just graduated 3 months ago. It's a bit so. And again, the bulk of the presentation I gave it to her, so I wasn't even prepared for so she was supposed to do the bulk of why I sit down and then maybe contribute. We are just to give her this program. But it's fine, I'll continue. So the argument is that the African environment is unique and has unique experiences that can't be accounted for with the theory eco-cinema. So, building on what Kadetani has said, or in his work, eco-cinema, eco-poetics, the point here is that we are arguing that African cinema must be looked through a different lens. And that lens is what we have coined as post-colonial eco-cinema that recognizes the peculiarity of the African environment. So you know, I don't know. It's not about you doing what I'm saying. I want to have to try something. You can go ahead here. Do you want to try now? Please unmute yourself. So I'll stop at my time, but I'm insisting that she participate, but it's fine with my time. Also, then another person can go ahead. All right, thank God. Okay, so the study therefore examines how African films can represent and relate to the African environment, the colonial impact on the African environment, and colonial legacies on Africa's politics of consumerism and industrial revolution. Following Kadita Iheka's conceptualization of materiality of infrastructure and ethics of representing ecological use in Africa, the study, therefore, is designed to examine how human and non-human nature are represented in culinary and the other field, and that is you see. So the study is looking at how we must reimagine the African environment with a view of determining how Africa's resource media. Now, thinking about the extraction industries in Nigeria. And we realize that from the history of Africa, when the colonial Africa used to be a Western environment where we were kind of a subsistence community before the colonialism came with the exploitation and exploitation of materials, and then the discovery of oil and so on and so forth. But the point is that our experience is different from that, and we can't say. And part of what we're doing is to decolonize eco cinema as a field, to ensure that eco cinema captures the uniqueness and the particularity of the African environment. And how do the North, the global North, still up to today through new colonialism? For instance, if you look at most of the extraction industries in Africa that are owned by multinational, maybe with a little stake by Nigeria. So I think it's to show that we must also decolonize extraction. Not decolonize extraction in Africa. And then we must also decolonize the intellectualization of extraction, and then extricate Africa from the one cat fits all kind of scholarship, where we use theoretical frameworks. We use theoretical frameworks probably provided by the global North to try to explain some experiences of Africa. And then if you look at the film Olympic by Process, and then you see that they try to project the uniqueness of the extraction industry and the impact of this extraction industry in Nigeria. The corruption, the images there speak to some of for instance, in Black November by Jet Pata, the film started by showing us the poverty in Niger Delta. In fact, Black November, the name was used. The name I think was a reference to Salawua, who was killed in November by the military regime of Abacha. So in the film, we see images of destruction. We see the peculiarity of the African environment, where the community, where extraction is going on, are living in penury, are living in poverty, and then the multinationals are going with the profits. The multinational, and then maybe with the collaboration of the corrupt few, the corrupt indigenous people, So what we are saying is that how can Igbo cinema capture these peculiarities in African films? If you read McDonald, Scott McDonald, and the rest of them, see that their approach to eco cinema is like elitist. Elitist. They look at the environment from the endemic perspective. They look at the environment from the endemic perspective. Sorry. They look at the environment from the endemic perspective, and from that egalitarian, from that elitist perspective. But we are saying that the African environment, as portrayed in a film like Black November, shows the pain, the poverty, the peculiarity of the Niger Delta environment, where they have these resources, and yet they are going through a lot of suffering and poverty. Now, what also post-colonial eco-criticism tries to do is to connect how this extraction affects the indigenous population, which includes human and non-human animals. How do you and this is what the conventional ecosystem does not do. It does not look at it focuses on conservation, it focuses on the environment, rather than focusing on the impacts on the indigenous community. And then we also look at how this the empire or the Roman Empire are still implicated in the environmental degradation of Africa, the environmental degradation of Africa, and how this degradation affects the humans and the non-humans. So, the work argues that the study argues that African cinema must capture the representation in films of ecological issues affecting the continent. It must rise to interface and mediate on issues of the environment, shape audiences' imaginations towards eco-consciousness, and more important, factor in the historical and cultural peculiarity of Africa in framing the environment. Thus, post-colonial eco-cinema in this study is an alternative framework. It's an alternative framework in reading African films, alternative to the conventional eco-cinema. And it commits to films that create material and environmental awareness. It imagines the colonial legacy on African politics of consumerism and also challenges the neo-colonial industrial position that is still happening. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation on the intersection between ecology and the cinema. I particularly like your new theory of post-colonial cinema. We don't know if the last presenter for this group is ready. We don't know if the Ghost of Brazil, the contemporary Nigerian narratives by Elizabeth Olawi, supposed to be the next presentation. Technical unit, are we able to connect to Elizabeth, please?
I can hear you clearly. I don't know whether you can hear me. Can you hear me? Because I can hear you clearly from here. It says that the host.
Elizabeth, can you hear me?
I can hear you clearly, loud and clear.
Can you hear me now?
I am hearing you clearly. I don't know whether it's a difficult.
Yeah, I can hear you now. Don't worry. Don't worry.
Okay.
So Elizabeth, you can please go ahead with your presentation. You have 12 minutes to present. 12 minutes.
Okay. Thank you so much. My presentation is titled The Ghost of Brazil in contemporary Nigerian narratives. Contemporary cultural studies, influenced by the works of Emily Kalasi and Ato Kwesing, have embraced the notion of reading the post-colonial street as an archive. Odia Ofemo, in his essay on imagination and the city, argues that cities and poems embody the coexistence of the past and the present, with history speaking through various events and images. The city, in this sense, becomes a poetic force, accommodating old myths and highlighting the archival nature of literature and how history persists within narrative. By closely examining archival moments in contemporary narratives, I aim to explore the ideological significance of Brazil's presence in Lagos, focusing on its manifestation in architecture, naming, and historical references. Through this analysis, I would demonstrate how these moments contribute to an authentic portrayal of Lagosian structures of feelings in these narratives. Specifically, I will delve into Noah Saro-Wiwa's memoir, Looking for Transwonderland, and Sefi Atta's novel, Everything Good Will Come, to investigate how these writers incorporate the ghost of Brazil in their narrative. You might be wondering, why ghosts? When discussing Brazil in contemporary Nigerian narratives, the concept of a ghost holds significant meaning. The term ghost carries two primary connotations. First, it refers to the apparition of a deceased person, appearing as a nebulous image to the living. Second, it represents the soul or the spirit of a departed person or non-human animal that can manifest itself to the living. In both definitions, a ghost symbolizes the past continually resurfacing in the present, either physically or spiritually, as a spirit or soul of what has been lost. In narrative set in Lagos, the ghost of Brazil emerges through physical architectural markers and the persistence of past worldviews and structures of feelings. I refer to these structures of feeling as residual presences, as described by Raymond Williams, which indicate a past that cannot be completely erased despite various attempts. To explore the efforts to erase the memories and physical remnants of Brazil from Nigerian history, one can turn to Aduke Gomez's polemics and groundbreaking historical studies on the physical and systemic violence inflicted on the memory of Brazil in recent Lagosian history. One article on our curated website titled Brazilian Heritage documents the destruction of Brazilian heritage in Lagos. Published in The Economist in 2017, the article describes how gentrification continually threatens Brazilian memory in Lagos. It highlights the lack of financial resources for preservation and restoration as a significant factor contributing to the destruction of old buildings. The article also mentions the demolition of Ilojoba, a 162-year-old house built by a returning slave, which had been listed as a national monument before Nigeria's independence. So the next question is, how do these ghosts manifest in literature? The reality is present. This reality is represented in Sefi Atta's novel, Everything Good Will Come. Many in the novel aligns it with the ideas of formerly enslaved people who created Brazilian-styled houses. Enitor, the protagonist's father-in-law, is known as Franco. He bears a Brazilian name signifying the connection to Lagos families descended from formerly enslaved people from Brazil. Enitor explains that the Francos were considered well-bred because their grandfather, Papa Franco, received an education in England. The physical presence of Brazilian houses represents a link to this historical legacy, many of which are falling into disrepair or have been demolished. As Enitor puts it, Papa Franco acquired a huge estate which survived the slum clearance that wiped out most of the Brazilian quarters in Lagos. Some of the buildings now looked as if a giant fist had come down from heaven and punched them to the ground. Those that remained standing were rickety, with tall shutters and wrought iron balconies. These houses, once abundant in Lagos, speak of a past when Africans were taken as slave laborers to Brazil. After the abolition of slave trade, there was a wave of liberated Africans returning home, many of whom were given Brazilian names by their captors. Ships docked at Lagos port and returning arrived in large numbers, with the Sierra Leoneans becoming known as the Saros, and the Brazilians and the Cuban returnees as Agudas. These returnees replicated Brazilian-style houses which flourished in Lagos during the colonial and the pre-colonial period, reflecting the migration of Brazilian taste from Brazil to Africa and revealing a significant aspect of Lagos history. No, Saro-Wiwa captures this blend of old and new architecture on Lagos Island in a travel memoir, Looking for Transwonderland. According to her, I'm going to quote, "But the island still looks the part with its corporate architecture and concreted canyons that created the echoey acoustics I loved so much. In between the crumbling skyscrapers stand the occasional Brazilian buildings. They were built by freed slaves who had returned to Nigeria from Brazil in the mid-19th century after slavery was abolished." Wiwa's memoir reveals that by the 1800s, almost a tenth of Lagos's population was Brazilian, further emphasizing the intertwining of architectural elements and historical influences in the city. In Lagos, the juxtaposition of skyscrapers associated with American grandiosity and old Brazilian buildings constructed by humbled African slave returnees creates a unique tapestry that mirrors the complexity of the city's identity. Rather than viewing these Brazilian houses as relics or blemishes on progress, they should have been seen as integral parts of the city archive, contributing to its historical heritage. The ghost of Brazil in this context represents a spirit that rejoices in affliction, seeing beyond the horrors of slavery and bringing something positive back from a harrowing experience. It aligns with Pierre Nora, the French historian's concept of national or collective memory, and Ofemu's observation that the essence of a city lies in the absorption of its various components into a whirlpool. Lagos, in Ofemu's view, states as it serves as an amalgamation of nationalities and the intermingling of individual talent. In narratives like Sefi Enta's Everything Good Will Come, the multifaceted architecture of Lagos is mirrored in the lifestyle of its characters. For instance, the protagonist mothers, a term that makes sense only in the context of polygamy, coexist within old structures of African polygamous households, while Enitor defies the role of a subservient wife, challenging traditional gender norms. The spatial map and architecture of Lagos embody these complexities as characters grapple with old or residual structures of feelings while navigating emerging ideologies. So my conclusion is that contemporary Nigerian narratives often incorporate the ghost of Brazil, revealing the city of Lagos as an archive of the past. The remnants of Brazil in architecture, naming, and historical references serve as authentic representations of Lagosian structures of feeling. These narratives capture the enduring presence of Brazil in the city, symbolizing the intertwined history of freedom and slavery. The architectural markers, such as Brazilian-styled houses, coexist with other structures, creating a unique tapestry that mirrors the complexity of Lagos's identity. Through the exploration of tribal moments and narratives, we gain a deeper understanding of how history survives and influences the present, enriching the narratives that depict the ghost of Brazil in contemporary Nigerian narratives. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Elizabeth, for your presentation. And we thank you also for keeping to time. Because of a young lady who has not been able to reach us, I plead that you allow us to give her 2 minutes, at least to be part of the conference. So please, let's give her 2 minutes so that she can have something to say. So please, what's her name?
Yeah.
Miriam.
Yeah.
Miracle, can you hear us, please? Hello, Miracle. All right, if we can reach out to Miracle, please. Can you decolonize African Juju?
Yes.
I think she muted herself. Okay.
Can you hear us?
Must be the service is application. Yeah, service. It's okay, sir. Go ahead.
Okay, so the question and comment is for Professor Olawe. I am exactly the student in the work of actually the Brazilian architecture in Lagos and Southwest Nigeria. She referenced the presentation. And I learned a lot from the presentation. I like the idea of the image of ghosts, the way that the architectural heritage the buildings are ghosts. I guess the question I have for Professor Olawe in reference to the ghost-like nature of the architecture of the Brazilians in Lagos is that in her presentation, Professor Olawe made reference to how these Brazilian returnees in building these buildings were putting a positive image of Brazil in architectural terms into Lagos. And I would want to urge Professor Olawe to slightly nuance that a little bit because of the reality that a lot of the never owned such properties in Brazil. And even though they depicted and brought the memory, the ghosts, the Brazilian architecture from Brazil to Lagos, they were actually appropriating architectural structures that they didn't own as individuals in Brazil into Lagos. And so there was a way they were rewriting the scripts. So the positivity is in the sense that they took buildings that were not their own and made them their own. So I guess my comment is that I would urge Professor Olawe to factor that in as well. That is, in appropriating these buildings, they went from beholding the buildings as slaves to now in Lagos as free individuals appropriating and making those buildings their own. So that's really the comment I have, that has to factor, as she talks about ghosts, that the nature of these ghosts has to be taken into consideration, that there was a logic of appropriation, right, of this architectural language into Lagos, right? As there are ghosts in Lagos, you have to factor in the fact that we were slaves when they beheld the buildings to begin with, and then made them their own as free individuals in Lagos.